Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. The leaders of the European Union countries held an urgent summit dedicated to achieving peace in Ukraine. The extraordinary nature of the event is evidenced, first of all, by the place of its holding. The leaders of the European Council, the European Commission, and the heads of state and government of the European Union held this summit in Luanda, the capital of Angola, because the European Union Africa Summit was booked for that time. And to meet with the leaders of African states, a number of European leaders, and the heads of the European Commission and the European Council arrived in the Angolan capital. But we had to talk not only about Africa, but also about the Russian-Ukrainian war. Part of the European Union Africa Summit was devoted to the plan that was discussed in Geneva by representatives of Ukraine, the United States, and European institutions. The leaders of the European Union countries who were not in Luanda joined this summit remotely. After him, the head of the European Council, Antonio Costa, announced significant progress and momentum in the negotiations. Obviously, I am referring not so much to real negotiations on ending the war in Ukraine, as to the dialogue that is currently taking place between the United States, Ukraine, and Europe. Ursula von der Leyen, head of the European Commission, speaks about the need to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, and that only Ukraine can decide on the size of its armed forces. This generally reflects the common position of the majority of the leaders of the European Union countries, who perceive the draft proposals of the United States to end the Russian-Ukrainian war as a document that clearly threatens the very sovereignty of Ukraine and rewards a brutal aggressor for attacking a neighboring country. But the leaders of the European Union countries, of course, do not want to comment on this document in such a way that it irritated the American President Donald Trump, who obviously did not know anything about the details of this plan until the moment it became public and until the moment when it became clear that the main points of this plan cause irritation, not only in Kiev or in European capitals, but also in Washington, where a number of leading senators and congressmen opposed him, unequivocally speaking about this plan as a plan for Ukraine's surrender to Russia, and noting that such tactics clearly undermine the prestige of the United States in the international arena, and demonstrate America's weakness rather than strength. And now, it is important for European leaders to quickly get out of the ambiguous situation that has developed after the publication of the plan in order to, on the one hand, reject any attempts to impose Russian capitulation conditions on Ukraine to end the war, and it is clear that the Kremlin is putting Kiev before a choice of either capitulation by military means or political, and on the other hand, to save the reputation of the President of the United States, Donald Trump, so that the American president did not guess that everyone guessed that he was ready to capitulate to Putin, even without knowing the terms of surrender. The catastrophe, of course, is huge. But, of course, not only counterplans related to the proposals that were developed by Trump's special representative Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law Jared Kushner after a meeting with the special representative of the President of Russia Kirill Dmitriev will be expected from the European Union, but also real measures to support Ukraine in the subsequent period of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Ursula von der Leyen noted that against this background, there is a discussion about the so-called repositional loans for Ukraine, which could help the Ukrainian state to form a budget and support its own armed forces to resist the ongoing Russian aggression. It also continues, despite any peace talks, in quotes, of course. And this is also a very important moment for understanding the situation, because Vladimir Putin sent Kirill Dmitriev to Washington, precisely to stop the sanctions flywheel. and prevent the imposition of sanctions against the main Russian oil corporations Rosneft and Lukoil, which are both instruments of Russia's war against Ukraine and the personal wallets of Vladimir Putin and his criminalized entourage. And in order to stop military and financial support for Ukraine. And, by the way, this may also be one of the important goals of the pseudo-peace process that Putin is trying to push through in the West, without stopping the war, to start a negotiation process that will make the United States and the European Union countries forget about continuing financial and military support for Ukraine. And in fact, why spend money if the war is about to end? And, of course, such a war can only end with the military defeat of Ukraine and the annexation of the territory of the destroyed country to the Russian Federation. Maybe for someone from Trump's entourage who dreams of joint development of Arctic resources with Putin's regime. There is nothing special about this, since we already see people among the representatives of the new American political elite who are deprived of both understanding of values and conscience. But for Europeans, all this is not a recipe, for the simple reason that the very advance of Putin's aggressive and unpredictable Russia to the borders of the civilized world raises questions about whether Europe will be able to maintain its own security in such an unpleasant neighborhood. And that is why the European Union is so hastily discussing what can be done in a situation where the discussion of the peace plan continues. And probably what will happen when it becomes clear that this plan is another stillborn paper, which is unlikely to lead to any real decisions in favor of ending the Russian-Ukrainian war. And in order for this war to really end, and for Ukrainians to be able to wait for the moment when the Russian economy collapses on the heads of citizens of an aggressive country, leaving them no chance but to abandon aggression and think about their own survival, real support by the European Union for Ukraine, and real resistance to any capitulation plans, even if these plans can be taken seriously by individual representatives of the Donald Trump administration, and supported by the American president himself, in the hope that the result will be much more important than the methods that the White House is trying to achieve this result now. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it, subscribe to my social networks, to the channels in Patreon, BAME, and Coffee and Donatello, which helps to develop these resources. Use the sponsorship function in YouTube itself.